Listen for words of faith from the early Christ communities. When Pentecost Day came around, the apostles had all met in the one room, when suddenly they heard what sounded like a powerful wind from the heavens. The noise filled the entire house where they were staying. Then something happened that seemed like tongues of fire. The tongues separated and came to rest on the head of each one of them. They were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in foreign languages as the Spirit gave them the gift of speech. At this sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in their own native language. Now Peter, standing among the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. People of Judea and all those who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and listen to what I say. This is what has been spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit on all of humankind, and your children shall prophesy. Your young people shall see visions, and your old people shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, women and men, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they too will prophesy. For the Spirit alive within us, manifesting in many ways and connecting people, we give thanks.
Hear what the Spirit is saying through the poetry of Jan Richardson. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you, even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there be an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find peace you did not think possible, and see what shimmers within the storm. We give thanks for poetry that speaks to us.
When Kathy and Jolyon approached me and asked, would I give some thought to perhaps a spiritual experience that I might share with you today, that was indeed a challenge. So it's not so much a reflection in the manner that we at Pitt Street are really used to from our minister and from visiting speakers, but thinking about moments that possibly I would call a spiritual experience. And I'm thinking that each one of you might be wondering what you might regard as a spiritual experience yourself, and possibly you would want to share that after the service with somebody else. And we've just heard a scripture passage about a day, I imagine, of powerful spiritual experiences for many of Jesus' followers, an experience that took them way beyond themselves, beyond what they had ever imagined would be possible. And today, I think that's happening here for me, being asked to share what might have not been imaginable or possible, an experience or two that I call spiritual. So come with me, if you will, to Central Australia. We're part of a group and we are at Uluru. Two of us choose to walk the 9.4 kilometres around the base of the rock, and we set off early before the day's heat becomes too much to even contemplate walking at all. The path from the visitors' centre hides our destination. There's some bushes and small trees, as I recall. And we set off along it until the moment that that path makes a turn. And suddenly we're before the first face of that monolith. At that exact moment, we both gasp and look at one another. A powerful bodily sensation of being drawn into the very core of that rock. Simultaneously, we ask each other, "Did you feel it?" Yeah, me too. Now, you may wish to speak of some metallic quality in the red earth or the rock itself, although my latest Google search describes the composition of Uluru as non-magnetic, so I don't quite know what more to make of that. And I can't offer you a scientific or even a rational explanation for what we both experienced in that desert stillness. We'd set off for the pleasure and satisfaction of a lengthy early morning walk around a majestic icon, taking in the Indigenous stories we'd heard the previous day. The experience we were given was vastly more than we'd expected, and it remains as powerful now as it was then. A turning point in my appreciation of the significance of connection that Indigenous people feel to land, how connection is belonging, a form of healing for them. But at the time, I saw deep connection to land as a healing experience for them, for Indigenous people, not me. Up to this point, what I've said was written before I'd heard the Reverend Dr. Gary Warriter Deverell speak here last month. Gary's invitation to think of all creation as animate, that is, imbued with ancestral spirits, has given me a new appreciation of our experience at Uluru that day. Gary asked us, what if God is the rock? What if the rock was inviting us both that day into a deeper healing relationship with itself? Joy Harlow captured this relationship in her poem Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings when she wrote this: "The land is a being who remembers everything." The land is a being who remembers everything. And it felt as if my worldview had slipped out of its old skin and taken me beyond myself and opened me to a new understanding of my place in creation. For me, it wasn't then a healing, but a deeply spiritual experience. Most, if not all of us, experience moments when something changes direction, purpose or meaning. In the context of a poem, it's called volta, the Italian word for turn. What has begun with one thought has now become something other. Something new is being revealed, understood or recognised for the very first time. I found it in Dawn Markova's poem that you might well know. It's called A Lived Life. The first 10 lines describe letting go of fear of living a lesser life, choosing to live more openly. Then the next line changes, does a turn. She says, I choose to risk my significance, not my insignificance. I choose to risk my significance. That brings me to a second experience that I do call spiritual and healing. And in her book, Bright Shining, How Grace Changes Everything, Julia Baird tells the story of an Indigenous woman, Auntie Lorraine Peters, who's removed from her family and sent to the Cootamundra Girls' Home. She's 4 years old. She spends her childhood years there and emerges deeply scarred. Eventually, she knows she needs to return and address her pain. With great courage, she does so. The most important part of healing, she says, is spiritual well-being. Quote, the core of our being for us mob. To me, Lorraine Peters was claiming the value of her story, her need for and right to spiritual well-being. She too chose to claim and risk her significance. And Auntie Lorraine's story reminded me of another moment, a walking on country tour that I went on. Others have done such ones here in our congregation. It's organised by people in the Uniting Church. This one took us to New South Wales Wiradjuri country, on which stands the Cootamundra Girls' Home. It was a strange connection for me as I discovered that the house where my grandparents lived was only a couple of streets away. And my grandparents raised their 6 kids there, my father included. Now, Cootamundra Training Home is known also as Cootamundra Domestic Training Home for Girls, Cootamundra Girls' Home, and Cootamundra Home for Orphan and Neglected Children. And it was set up by the Aboriginal Protection Board in a disused hospital building way back in 1911. And it was only for Aboriginal girls. They were removed from stations and reserves and taken to the home after being reported to the Aboriginal Protection Board by station managers or police, or spotted by the home finder, Miss Alice Lowe. The board would remove the child, sometimes after taking her to the children's court to be prosecuted. Girls were described on board records as, quote, of an age to be apprenticed or taken for training, or, if their parents resisted, as neglected. They were there to be trained to become domestic servants and farm hands in wealthy, non-Aboriginal households. Girls in the homes were referred to as inmates, and parents were unable to regain access to their children until they turned 18, and in many cases never again. The girls experienced systematic racial discrimination to remove their Aboriginal identity and alienate them from their families. In 1940, the Aborigines Protection Board was replaced by the Aborigines Welfare Board. The regime at the home became slightly more liberal, although it must be said the Aborigines Welfare Board instigated these changes to provide opportunities for Aboriginal girls to assimilate with white mainstream culture. Cootamundra girls began to attend the local high school and enter their produce and craft in the Cootamundra show. They became more accepted in the town. They also had more training and employment, although domestic service remained a priority until it closed in 1969. Currently it's renamed Bimbadeen and it's used as an Aboriginal-run Christian training centre. Now, when I read all this online, all this information, it really didn't cover or include Lorraine's story at all, or stories of babies in a cot room and toddlers as young as 2 being taken there. Or of the ones we were told that day we visited the home, of the little ones who waited near the well at the entrance to the home for someone to come down the long drive to welcome them, to visit them, to take them home. And of course they waited and never saw someone. Often parents were prevented. They lived too far away. They didn't have the money to visit. I talked with my aunt, my father's still remaining alive sister, Roma, who is coming up to 102 years of age. And she told me that she and her sisters knew of the girls and were warned to keep away from them. My grandparents, my father, aunts and uncle were living with the stories they'd been told, not the full truth of the lives of those girls in the home. And the day I visited that home, it suddenly turned into a very personal recognition of the pain of First Nations people when they are separated from their culture, their land, their family. My father and his siblings were not removed from Grandma and Grandpa. They lived a hard-working life, unaware of the truth of those girls. And so questions I find are unexpectedly arising in me. One of them was, why am I telling this second story? The first one was so clear to me, that moment of feeling drawn into the rock. Why am I telling this one? I thought it was connecting my experience at Uluru and my day in Cootamundra. Both had reminded me how vital is connection with the ordinary mystery of the natural world, and how basic is my need to belong to our human family. But I'm still feeling uncomfortable and I couldn't put my finger on it. These occasions happened a few years ago now, and if they were of such spiritual significance, I'm asking myself, what have I done to share their impact or say anything other than just speak of them today? And then I remembered words from a recent reflection given by our minister, Josephine Ingpen, and they're occupying my mind still. And she says to us that day, "You are beloved." Do you remember that morning? And she asked us to say it again, "You are beloved." Now those words did not and do not come easily from me, from my mouth or from my heart. We can say them, but I'm not sure that I could fully know them. And so, like Auntie Lorraine Peters, today I'm surprising myself. I'm choosing to risk my significance, to own that, as with every other part of creation, I am beloved. That I have a voice, that speaking today may even carry the potential to change someone else's worldview and their sense of connection. On this day that we now call Pentecost, ordinary people were caught up in something powerful, life-changing, reorienting. Such experiences can take us way beyond ourselves, beyond what we ever imagined being possible. And they can also take us deeper into ourselves, to a place we hadn't known we even needed to be. I recently found a poem by Mary Oliver, a favourite of many of us. It's called Moments, and if I may, I'd like to read it to you. There are moments that cry out to be fulfilled, like telling someone you love them, or giving your money away, all of it. Your heart is beating, isn't it? You're not in chains, are you? There's nothing more pathetic than caution when headlong might save a life, even possibly your own. The disciples went headlong into Pentecost that day. I imagine that collectively they'd experienced the whole gamut of emotions: denial, doubt, deceit, despair. But that day, their lives took a significant, unexpected healing turn. I hope on that day they realised and believed that they too were beloved. And it's turned into a spiritual and healing experience for me. Moments of grace for which I'm utterly thankful.